Our next speaker is another ATDS alum who's been to a couple of these, Jonathan Whitmore, who is or was a data science and machine learning senior manager from Apple, who's going to be telling us about rethinking standard advice for unconventional success in tech. So please take it away, Jonathan.
Let's do a quick test here that this is working. Am I coming through?
Yes, we hear you.
All right, good. And then, of course, the absolute final test of whether the presentation displays.
Okay, yeah, we got it.
All right. Cool. All right, so let's do this then. Cool. So hi, welcome everyone. Let me see if I can see one more thing here. 1 second. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Whitmore. I will be talking about rethinking standard advice, career advice for unconventional success in tech. Okay, so let's get started. So first things first, a little bit about me. Who am I? I have approximately 10 years of experience in academia and about 10 years in the tech industry. My academic background is a 6-year, I did a PhD at UC San Diego, then a 3-year postdoc. And then tech industry, after the postdoc, I did an 8-week inside data science thing, as was just mentioned. I spent 3 years at Silicon Valley Data Science, which was a startup doing data science stuff. Essentially, it was acqui-hired, it was acquired by Apple, specifically ad platforms at Apple in 2017, and I was there for the next almost 6 years. So I started as a data scientist. I then went to become a senior data scientist. Then I became a manager of a data science and machine learning manager. And then by the end of my time there, I was a senior manager, which was kind of a different role than just manager. And currently, so I quit back in middle of last year, basically. So currently I'm on a break, spending time with family and just basically working on fun technical side projects. So first of all, if there's any audio issues or you can't see me, let me know. Like now is a good time to say, hey, like we need to tweak something. So far, so good?
Yeah.
I'll assume yes, unless, okay. Cool. So I have some just high-level meta tips about this talk and well, all talks too, but I think it's really important to have a system for implementing what you've learned into changing how you behave. There's a lot of times I've seen people in meetings or in talks or whatever, where they basically go, oh yeah, it's a good idea. And maybe they even write it down somewhere, but then, 6 months from now, it's a thing that has never actually entered their practice. So I would say spend a little bit of time thinking about how you can actually implement things or change how you behave. Do take notes because that is at least a part of that. And one specific recommendation of how to do that is set some time up in your calendar to review your notes from this entire day. Maybe 2 weeks from now, put it in your calendar for, I don't know, 10 a.m. on a Tuesday and say, oh, I'll take a half an hour to re-go over all the notes I took for that whole day and see what else I should apply. So that's just like a meta tip here. Okay, so first, this is about planning your career and kind of the career paths and all that. So let's just actually talk about the career ladder and that kind of thing. So once you're in the tech world, there's kind of 2 main paths. If you're not going the entrepreneurship route, if you're going in the non-starting a business route, you basically start as an individual contributor, which is your data scientist, and then if you then get promoted to be a senior IC at some point because you've demonstrated that you're more capable than just a starting individual contributor. And then from about there, you have kind of 2 paths open to you. You have the technical path and the manager path. And there's a lot of words that have been spilled on these kinds of decisions and these kinds of paths. I'll give you kind of a quick high-level overview and just mention a few things here. So if you choose the technical path, you basically continue as you go up through the levels to be either like senior IC plus, which is just kind of levels of as an individual contributor. It could be thought of sometimes as a tech lead or a tech lead just kind of at higher levels. Speaking of levels, there's a website called levels.fyi. So that's the actual URL for this. And this is a snapshot from that website. And this is the technical levels for 3 companies, Apple, Amazon, and Google. And they're aligned such that at any horizontal spot, should be roughly equivalent. So you can see the levels don't align across companies, even very large tech companies. They have very different names for things that should be somewhat similar. But you have an Apple, you have these ICT, so individual contributor, T for technical. So ICT 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you get into these distinguished engineer levels. Apple starts with like L3 and goes up to L10, which is their levels. This is Google's thing. And Amazon has their own version of this. And it's interesting because the levels don't really match very well across them. Like an ICT 5 at Apple is very, very senior, and L5 in Google is quite senior, but not like they just don't match quite well. So this is a nice little visual, at least, that there's lots of different levels here. I had someone interview from Google once who was an L7 who wanted to be an ICT 7 at Apple. They wouldn't consider anything lower than that. And it was like, we literally don't have that level at Apple. It just doesn't make sense. So there are many different levels on the technical path. That's the main point here. If you were to choose the manager path, here's an example structure for like a larger company. This is sort of maps kind of onto what my situation was at Apple. So you kind of go to the IC and then manager, senior manager, then at some level you get to a director, then a VP, then like the C-suite where you get, CTO or CEO things. I want to make one note here. Each of these things, even though these are managers and actually on the technical path as well, each of these different jobs is actually a very different job than the one either below or above it. They're the skill sets, what they're worried about, how they spend their time. They're very different kinds of jobs, even if they're in a single path. So this is kind of like the 2 standard ways of thinking about it. Like you have the technical path or you go to the manager path at some point. I think a very useful one that has gotten some words, at least, is like the pendulum, where you're not just actually stuck on one of those paths. Like once you make a decision, you don't have to stick with the technical path. You can go back and forth. Now there's some considerations on this, like how long can you be a manager before going back and whether it makes sense, but I'll leave those details for later. I think the real takeaway from this is that if you see yourself being plugged in and you have to make one decision about which path am I taking here, these decisions are reversible. They're also you can switch between them in many different ways. You can switch them between companies as another way of like leveling up and getting different levels. But the main point here is that there isn't a single path, even within a hierarchy, of something that makes sense for someone. So you have to think about your career in this way, that do what makes sense for you. So how do you actually have such a thing? So one book I'd like to recommend reading is Deep Work by Cal Newport. I think it's a fantastic way of thinking about your career. And so one quote from him here is, having a great career requires attaining great skills through deep work. Now he has to define, of course, what deep work is. So he defines it as professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration. You're pushing your cognitive capabilities to their limit, and you create new value, you improve your skills, and are hard to replicate. If you're doing actual hard thinking work, it's very hard to have someone else just come in and do something that's equivalent to it. Of course, deep work is in contrast to shallow work, which is not cognitively demanding. It's logistical style tasks, often performed while distracted, and you don't create much new value in the world, and they're easy to replicate. So what do you do if you want to have fantastic career success, according to Cal Newport? Make sure to schedule distraction-free professional activities that push your cognitive abilities. So basically, schedule deep work. Also, schedule distractions, which is, I think, an important consideration that's usually not mentioned. Schedule time for either distractions or things that are explicitly not deep work. Have some rituals. He likes to say they have a deep work ritual, like I'm actually getting into it right now, or I'm shutting down at the end of the day to really close off at the end of the day and just kind of set your mind at ease. I think these are all great ideas. One other thing I'd like to mention that's kind of wrapped up in both deep work and the career paths and deciding which path and what kinds of options you want to do. is that your work is not your identity. This is an important mindset for both improving. There's a book by called Smart Cuts, where they basically show an example of saying, if you're trying to improve as a comedian and you bomb a joke at something, the right framing should be something like, that joke wasn't funny, not that I'm not funny. So if you're trying to improve at anything, try to externalize the thing you're doing as separate from your identity as much as you can. So this, I think, helps with both imposter syndrome, but also I think in everyone in this room's situation where they're switching from I'm an astronomer or an astrophysicist into something that's not that. If you think of it as something that you are versus as something, either a job you have or a thing that you do, like, oh, I work as an astronomer or I work as an astrophysicist, I think this can actually help quite a bit. It took some time for me to actually think about this as well, to say like, oh, if I'm no longer an astrophysicist, am I just doing something else? I don't know. Anyway, your work is not your identity, and try to internalize that as much as you can. That's my recommendation there. There's one other thing that I think is a really useful theory. It's useful to consider strongly and see how much of it resonates with you, but also there's other aspects I think works, called motivation hygiene theory. And this is a thing that talks about like how motivated, like how your actual working experience itself. And it's this developed by this psychologist, Friedrich Herzberg. And the main idea is that the factors of job satisfaction are different from factors that cause dissatisfaction, which I think is not an intuitive or an obvious first thought. And he splits them into two main ideas, hygiene versus motivation here. So the hygiene one is status, salary, and working conditions. And motivations are things like challenging work, personal growth, responsibility, involvement in decision-making, and sense of importance. So the hygiene ones are things that you need to have some minimum level for. So you need to have some minimum level of salary. If it's absolutely an unacceptably low salary, this can be a huge source of dissatisfaction. Like, I'm just not being paid anywhere near enough, or your status is incredibly low or way out of scope for what you think you should do. It can be bad. Of course, working conditions, like even your commute time and things. But one of the problems that people have in their career is correctly identifying something that if you don't have it, or if it exists in some bad form, is a source of dissatisfaction, that swinging the other way and maximizing it is going to be a source of either motivation or satisfaction with your job. And this theory at least says no at all, and it corresponds very clearly with mine. So, minimizing your work commute to be, 0 minutes or something, like, okay, that's maybe, a useful thing to have, but at some point the diminishing returns rapidly come in there. On the other side, there's the motivation stuff. Like, so what is it that actually gives you the intrinsic motivation to continue doing your job and to continue doing work here? So challenging work, personal growth, responsibility, involvement in decision-making, feeling you have a sense of importance to an organization. These are all things that if you can grab that, this will help. So what do you do this? How should this change your thinking to call back to the earlier thing I was saying here? So among jobs with some reasonable salary, some minimum level of it, if you have options here, don't necessarily look for one that maximizes your salary. Look for the job that does something, especially early on, that maximizes learning and your personal development. And so once you have like some reasonable salary, it's called that neutral. Yes. Keep in mind whether if having or not having something is either a negative, and if you remove the negative getting you to neutral, it's also maybe neutral is the spot you should aim for, not for maximizing that thing. And vice versa, positives and switching that to negatives. So consider that. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about learning your tools, because I think this is an underappreciated thing and under-stressed thing in all the talks I've seen about careers. So first things first, I want to talk about learning your tool, like using a keyboard, learning to type. So learn to accurately touch type and type without looking at the thing, like say 60 words a minute as like kind of a minimum point. And the reason for doing this isn't necessarily to type faster directly. I think it removes the friction between your thoughts and your output. And so in this case here, I'd say, like, if you want to use this same kind of framework as this motivation hygiene thing, that, things that are negative versus that. If you are terrible at typing. That's obviously a negative. Getting to what I would consider neutral is like, say, 60 words a minute without having to look. That's obviously worth doing. Is it worth maximizing that and trying to aim for typing at 200 words a minute and all kinds of other, like, probably not. So this is one of those things where if you don't have it, getting it to neutral is really helpful. Maximizing it to the positive side is probably not that useful. Okay, so anyway, learn to type. When you get into the tech world, the calendar is a tool. So this is first thing, learn to use this tool. Schedule meetings with yourself. Like in terms of like using time boxing and ways of forcing limits on time spent as well on activities. So for example, let's say you've gone through your emails, I need to respond to 3 of them. Decide how much time you're going to spend in total on those 3 minutes. Say it's 15 minutes I'm going to spend on that. And I'm going to schedule the time for it. It's going to be at 2:15 this afternoon. I'm going to spend 15 minutes on it. And when that 15 minutes is up, you've time boxed it. You're going to hit send on those things. So partly you've actually scheduled the time, work has to be done, and you've put away some time there that if you have to move it again, you have to at least consciously put it somewhere else in your calendar. But you've also limited how much of an impact those things can have, which is, I think, an important thing to also have. Anyway, calendar is a tool. It's worth getting good at it and spending time on that. Email is also a tool. So there's a lot of these things here, like ideas like this bottom line up front, which is a very common, widely known thing across actually military contexts where it came in front. But the bottom line up front means the first thing you see in an email that you send to someone is the thing they should take away from it. So it's a recommendation, like we need to cancel project X or something else. It's not a summary of the email. Also, write a good subject line. You don't have to do this, but this is maybe taking it too far. But consider, if you have tons of emails, a full all caps thing of some small set of subject lines that say things like, you have to take some action. Whoever receives this email has to take an action, or this is information, or a decision needs to be made, or a request of some kind. You don't have to do this, but it's at least thinking about this. Like, is this email, does this have like a specific thing needs to happen? So do that. If you're writing code and checking it in, learn, again, at some reasonable level, your tools. It's just the number of people who are senior, very, very senior, like data scientists, who essentially have used Git for, let's say, 8 years, who basically don't know how to use it still, like beyond even checking in or pulling it. Or I'm not sure what happens when you say git pull, is astonishing. And so this is a thing where if you're not good at it, it's a big negative. If you're at some reasonable level, it's neutral. Getting super good at it, like really going into the weeds, is, again, just probably not worth doing that, but get to an appropriate level with your tools. Same thing for coding environment, like whatever you're using, RStudio, Jupyter Notebooks, VS Code, Neo, whatever you're using, like know the keyboard shortcuts, learn the options. I recommend pair programming at least a little bit if you can, and asking for feedback with people who you think are knowledgeable about this. So learn your tools. And again, mastering your tools removes friction. That's like one of the main things here. I can talk about this for a long time, so I think I'll just I'll say that point has been made. One final thought here before I go into some Q&A stuff is think about how you work. This is like a meta feedback loop that should be running in your head constantly, and especially from repeated actions, from single decisions. And I'll give you basically an example from thinking about just how you recharge. So imagine, okay, a person listening to this, someone in the room right now is listening to this talk, and they're getting their first tech job. They have a stressful day at work. Let's say this is a year from now. They get home and they think, oh, I need to recover from that stressful day. What a day. And at that point, the universe splits into 2 timelines. Timeline A, the person grabs a glass of wine. Timeline B, the person goes for a 20-minute walk. And let's just say this becomes the default way for each of these people for the next, these timelines for the next 30 years. Like, how different is the life from version A versus version B? And choosing that decision once doesn't make any difference 30 years from now. But if this is a thing that becomes a default way of reacting to something, they can become very important decisions. So I'll just leave it with that. If you have something that's going to be done over and over again, or repeated actions, actually, it's worth taking time to think about what you're doing there. So, and I recommend trying to hit the healthy habits as often as possible. Okay, some concluding thoughts here. Don't let the career ladder or the hierarchy of an org chart define your expected path, both what you should be doing in the near future or the long term. There are many different ways of charting your path in the world. So just consider that there's different options besides just a ladder. Reiterate this point that your work is not your identity. You should try to keep them as separate as possible. Be thoughtful and deliberate in how you spend your time. Use repeated actions to signal that you should think hard about something. Aim to keep a balance in life, both keeping sufficient motivation in what you're doing with your time, both at work and outside of work, and hygiene in terms of like not letting things that are causing you to suffer, let's say a horrible commute or your salary is just way out of scope. Don't let them build. Finally, learn your tools. So I have here a link for sources of inspiration in different contexts here, a number of books that I think are worth reading. Instead of trying to copy this down, whatever, you can scan this QR code. It'll send you to my GitHub gist where you can just click on any of the links. Or if you don't have an iPhone up, you can actually just type in bit.ly 2024-AAS- my last name, WHITMORE. And you can get your stuff there. All right, so with that, I will open up for questions. And I might have to switch my audio situation for that. So give me 1 second here.
All right, let's take our speaker while he switches audio. Got time for a question or maybe two.
How do you identify in yourself where those areas of inadequacy or places to improve your overall hygiene, you called it?
How do you find
So-
places that, okay, you got it?
Yeah, you could repeat it though. I think I got it, but just if you have it, I wouldn't
Yeah,
mind
how do
hearing.
you identify places where you need to work on your own hygiene and, do the hard work?
Yeah, so I think it's actually it's one very clear way is to just check in with yourself, just feeling as in like are you feeling really irked by the fact that you hear about someone else's salary is way higher than yours or something like that? Now, is that coming from just an intrinsic like jealousy type thing, or is it actually like, you know what, I really am actually being undervalued here? So I think part of it comes from just your visceral response to the how it feels. And it can be hard to identify the things that are negative that kind of build up. I know that there's a couple of times when I continued to let work kind of leak, both into my academic and my tech career, let my work thing leak into my life for too long. And like there's times when like my wife was like, are you just like being annoyed a lot more just in general, like outside of work? And it's like, oh yes, I guess I have some baseline level of irritation that somehow has been building up. So sometimes other people can help point you out for that. But for a lot of these hygiene type things, especially, it's like how you feel about it. If you feel in the morning like, oh, work is going to start, you feel terrible. Is it like, because you know that one presentation needs to get done? Or is it like, no, this is like life is, it kind of sucks now because I have this job. That's like a very good indicator for this. And you should hopefully have some significant periods of time where you're like, oh, this problem, I'm really looking forward to solving this. And like, I just can't wait to like crack this, this stupid thing that's bothering me for a while. That like the motivation's there because it's like, you want to crush it rather than like, you feel you're going to get scolded from it. Hopefully that's helpful.
More question?
Hi, I'm curious about your greatest source of motivation in your job at Apple. Could you tell us more about like what drives you to your job as you switch from academia to industry? What is your greatest source of motivation?
That's a really good question. So I was there for almost 6 years, so it changed over time. I'll give you a period where I had a very clear motivation for myself, which was I had a vision for using simulation as a tactic to address some of the problems we had. And I thought I had an idea for how this could help the whole org. And that was like, I worked on that. That was a huge source of motivation. I thought I could actually make a difference to the people around me, to the decisions we were making, and to how we thought about things. And that drove me to like kind of build out this kind of simulation project, which actually led me to having a team that reported to me, which led to other things. So this that's one aspect there. Was like I had my my arms around an idea that I knew if I could deliver on this idea would be a really impactful thing. And I thought it was a good idea that I had. So that's like a very clear moment of motivation from my side.
All right, let's thank our speaker again.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wish I heard a lot of those things about 10 years ago.
I'm glad to hear that. Looking forward to Jess's talk. All right.
Yeah, good segue there, Jonathan. Thank you. So our final speaker today, one of the original founders of ATDS. In fact, it was basically her brainchild that she sort of handed to me. Jess Kirkpatrick, Director of Data Science Product at ThreadUp, is going to talk to us about the art of managing up. And I'll remind everyone, the ATDS podcast, episode 1 with Taka Tanaka is out. Episode 2, starring Jess Kirkpatrick, will be out on February 2nd. So take it away, Jess.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, very good.
Okay, so I'm going to do something a little bit different. When making the slides for this, I realized that since this is more of a kind of behavioral talk and doesn't have pretty data, that there wasn't really great imagery. So I'm just going to do this kind of like a TED Talk where I talk. I'm passing along the like links to both a blog post I wrote about this and like a presentation deck in the chat. And you'll be able to access it from ATDS website, but I think it's better to just look at me than look at like some, you know, OpenAI generated like image that I tried to put together to demonstrate these things. So I also would love to actively use the question and answers during the talk. So for those of you who aren't like able to type to that right away, you could maybe join the Zoom, or I will try to also like pause for questions after each topic to see if there's any deeper elaboration I can do about these topics. So a little bit about me. I've been doing data science similar to our last speaker for about 10 years. I did a astrophysics PhD at Berkeley before that. I did not do any postdoctoral research, went straight into data science. And I've worked at a bunch of different places. I'm currently at ThreadUp, which is an online retail company that resells women's clothing. So it's online use clothing. And my talk today is about things I wish I had known about effectively interacting with your manager when I started my career. I think that a lot of academics have no management training. And so many of us coming from academia do not really have great examples of a manager that knows how to manage, nor do we know much about how to make the most of our relationship with our advisor, with our manager. And so this was something that I was not really ever taught before I went into the working world. But because I started working in my 30s after doing a PhD, I think most of my managers assumed that I knew more about how to effectively manage up. And so I misstepped a lot and made a lot of mistakes. And so this is me trying to help folks not make those same mistakes. A lot of this might seem like, common sense. And if you already know this, then you're way ahead of where I was when I started. But anyway, that's kind of the background here. So what is managing up? Managing up on a high level is helping guide your career and your relationship with your manager through actively, pushing information and guidance upwards and not just taking guidance downward from your manager. And so high themes of what managing up entails would be understanding the goals and pressures of your manager, having a positive relationship, having proactive communication, coming with solutions instead of problems, and advocating for yourself. And I'm going to talk about in detail how you might do all of those things and examples of them. Managing up is not just flattering or, kissing up to your manager. It's not trying to bypass your manager inappropriately. It's not avoiding responsibility or managing your manager and being the boss of your manager. And it's not just about you individually trying to kind of help yourself, but more thinking about how can you work in the broader organization and be an effective partner to your manager. So why should you do this? Well, essentially, this, if done right, should make you get more from your manager, them get more from you. This enhanced collaboration leads to fewer misunderstandings. You would have more synchronized work and effective teamwork. It means that you're aligned with your manager's goals and therefore would advance in your career. If you're pleasing your manager, then that is good for you. It means that resource allocation can be better across the team because your manager knows information that you have that they don't have. It can reduce frustration and lead to better job satisfaction. It can help you have more impact and feel like you're influencing more in the company. So that's kind of the high level of what managing up is. And I'm going to go through kind of each of these high level ideas of how you can manage up and then pause for questions about each of them, either from the Q&A or from the audience themselves. So first is knowing your manager's goals. So I think that early in my career, it was very mysterious what my manager did. It felt like actually all they did was put together PowerPoint presentations and sit in meetings. And as a manager, sometimes it feels like that's all I do. But actually, there is a lot of visibility that managers have to the wider organization and pressures and things that they're thinking about that you might be oblivious to. And they don't necessarily know what is appropriate to communicate with you. A really good manager will push the right information to you, but it also is your responsibility to get information out of them. And so things that I would recommend doing are asking your manager what they are focused on right now and how you can support them. Practice actively listening and trying to grasp their perspective. Staying observant of reoccurring things that are challenging for them, opportunities for their growth and ways that you can compensate for that, and how you can kind of help them be better at their job. Regularly solicit feedback. I think I used to think that my manager would just always give me feedback, but managers are people too, and it can be awkward to give feedback, and people don't always know how to do it or won't do it as proactively as they should. But it's much easier to give feedback if someone says, hey, what did you think about that presentation I did? Or, hey, I felt like I miscommunicated in that meeting. Can you give me some insight about how I could have approached that better? That not only gives me something specific to react to, but it makes me feel like you're open to that feedback and you're not going to be defensive. Whereas if I proactively push that information to you and you aren't expecting it or aren't, aware, sort of open to it, then that can cause for more stressful interaction. Maintain empathy and remember that your manager is a person too. They have their own strengths and weaknesses and they make mistakes. And they aren't always going to know exactly the right thing to do in every situation. And so trying to see them as a full person and recognize that they're doing their best and they are trying to do what's best for you in your career while balancing a lot of other information they have that you might not have. So any questions about knowing your manager's goals or any of the things I just said? All right, going once.
Yeah, we got one.
Okay.
Well, I think one of the common questions is that how do you communicate without leaving the impression that you have some weakness in your job, that you may fail to do some job when you try to communicate with your managers, right? Do you have any suggestion in handling this kind of thing, like being honest about your weakness in certain aspect of your jobs?
Yeah. So let me just summarize what I think. The question is like, how do you communicate your weaknesses or areas where you might need support without looking bad? Yeah. So, I think that that will be a little bit more what I discuss around kind of like being solution oriented and transparent. But I can talk to it here as well. So ultimately, like, you're not going to know everything, just like your manager doesn't know anything. And I think it is worse for someone to hide what they don't know or pretend that they are like on track with something and like not proactively communicate that, and then it to later come out that they were kind of spinning their wheels, than to be very transparent like right away and anticipate, hey, like this isn't going well, or I'm not sure what to do here, and kind of get ahead of the problem. So transparency is super important. And I think I would much rather someone that I report to say like, hey, I'm not sure what to do, I need help. And then for me to like not know that and assume that everything's on track and then later find out it's not. Now, like, there should be a certain amount of work that people do to kind of do the legwork. And like, if someone is like sending me questions like that, I think like, hey, you could Google this for 2 minutes and figure it out, that's going to be annoying. But like, most of the time, the problem is the other direction, that people don't proactively come to me with like asking for help or input, and they spin their wheels for way too long. And I wish they had come to me much sooner. And so I think that, it's just like, you should have the trust and relationship with your manager that you can be vulnerable and like admit when you need help and you don't know something, ideally. Another question in the chat was, do you have any thoughts on working with a manager who is new to the role, they were promoted and still figuring out what their goals are? Yeah, so I think actually having like a bad manager is really hard challenge, or an inexperienced manager when you're an IC, and that's when individual contributor, and that's when having these things, or like these managing up skills, is really important. Because if your manager is new and they're overwhelmed in their own newness of the role, it's going to be harder for them to proactively give you the feedback you need, think about your career, give you the right context and things like that. So it's much more important for you to put some of that structure in place and help guide them to, give you the things you need and this and help support you. I don't think it's appropriate for a manager to put their stress onto you. And so if managers are overwhelmed and they're venting to you or being emotional, like, that's not okay. And there should be a way for you to sort of set that boundary. But generally, like, I think that things like setting agendas for your one-on-one, being proactive about communicating what are your blockers or what are your challenges, asking like, hey, what is top of mind for you this week? What are things that you need support with? That can be really helpful to a new manager, to kind of give them structure to support you. Okay. Thanks for the questions. I love this. Please keep it going for each section. There's a few different sections. So then the next area, which we've touched on a bit, is proactive communication. So I am in meetings maybe 6 hours a day. I'm getting tons of information thrown at me. It is hard for me to keep track of a lot of the details. And so it is very important for the people on my team to push the most relevant stuff to me and make sure it gets in front of me. And that means I want regular updates about what's happening, things that might be changing, blockers, things that aren't working as expected, so that I can reallocate resources or address the problem or put out the fire. It is much better to have someone over communicate than under communicate. Setting really clear expectations is very important, and talking about if those expectations change. For me, it doesn't really matter if someone says it's going to take a week or 2 weeks to do something, as long as I don't think they're like sandbagging. But like, it's more that they're good at estimating how long something will happen and when things will be delivered, so that I can coordinate across a bunch of other teams that are dependent on that information. So it's very clear expectations is really great. And if things change, knowing that sooner than later. I think a lot of less experienced people will get behind and then hope they can catch up, and so they avoid telling their manager because they don't want to get them upset. And then like things kind of snowball and we end up in a place where we're, 3 weeks behind schedule and like I didn't know about it. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me about this before? Asking questions and clarifying uncertainties right away, because sometimes minor misunderstandings can grow if you don't address them right at the beginning. And then also coming with not just challenges, but offering potential solutions. Often is much easier for me to react to someone saying, should I do A or should I do B, than someone saying, I don't know what to do, and then just having to come up with the answer. And often the person has a better idea about what the answer should be than I do because they're more in the weeds of the problem. And so it is but I might have some context that can help them make a decision between several different options. So whenever possible, I try to come with a few suggested solutions and, clarity around like the pros and cons about the two that I see and ask for feedback from my manager. And then again, seeking feedback proactively and specifically and as close to the situation as possible, whether that be right after you did a presentation, on a specific analysis. Like I said before, sometimes it can be awkward to like proactively give someone feedback, or even you're just busy and you don't think about it. But if someone asks for it, it is much easier to give that when asked for it specifically. Any questions about proactive communication? Okay. So the next is building a positive relationship. So I think that earlier in my career, and I had a little bit more of an adversarial point of view between me and my manager, sort of thinking like, oh, they're the like disciplinary or the boss or the person that's like trying to get me to do more work. And there are managers where that is what they are. But most managers are really just trying to find the way to have you do the most impactful work that is going to help you and help the company and help the team. You looking good and being successful reflects well on the manager, and you doing bad reflects poorly on the manager. So I am aligned with like you looking good, like that's incentive that we are both aligned on. So if you can think about your manager as someone who is trying to kind of be your coach, like you're part of a sports team and they're coaching you and they see things and know things that maybe you don't see. And they have context that you don't have because they're seeing a bigger picture of the entire game, but they do want you to be successful. They do want you to look good and they do want you to, score. So, so thinking about it that way and taking any input that they have as like having the intent of making you be better. Ways that you can build that relationship is being consistent, being accurate with your like time estimates, being reliable when you say you're going to do something, being honest about what you know and don't know, being engaged and showing enthusiasm. It is hard when you have someone who is reporting to you that is only coming to you with complaints. It's kind of like, any other relationship, like it can be demoralizing as a manager when a person is just constantly coming to you with things that they're unhappy about. So trying to balance like bringing wins to your manager as well as problems. Being respectful of their time and recognizing that like they're very busy and often have back-to-back meetings. And so be on time and set an agenda and make the most of your one-on-ones with them. And then, realizing that they're full people, they have, strengths and weaknesses, they have bad days. It's hard for managers to, give feedback. It's hard for us to admit when things are not working. So recognize that it's these things are not just challenging for you, they can be challenging for your manager, can help you have more productive, hard conversations than if you think of it as more of like an adversarial relationship. Any questions about positive relationships? Okay.
I have a question. You mentioned having an agenda for the one-on-ones. do you have like a template, or how do you actually, can you just go into that a little bit, like what you did? I have my own thing, but I want to know what you end up doing.
Yeah, so my current company uses a program called Lattice, which I think costs money, so you don't necessarily need to do it this way, but it allows both people to add to like bullet points to agenda. It also has suggested things based on past conversations you've had or bullet points or just general career growth. And it prompts you to add those 24 hours before your meeting. But I think you could do that in like a shared Google Doc. The format that I use with my manager is I'll say, wins from the past week, because she often needs to report up to her executive. What are the big accomplishments, things that are top of mind for me for this week, and any things that she should know or heads up that are things that, potential problems. And so that's the sort of format of my report out. And then I will say, like, if there's specific things I need to talk to her about that are like a personnel thing or a hiring thing, then I'll add those to the agenda. And then I ask my teammates to do something, the people on my team to do something similar. All right, I think I only have 2 minutes left, so I will wrap up. We talked about being solution oriented already, but more around like bringing solutions to your manager, not just problems, and trying to give them something to react to instead of just asking open-ended questions can both show your initiative and show that you're thinking about solutions, but also can help that conversation be more effective. Another thing that is important is to learn how to handle feedback. I think that this touches on what Jonathan said around like not taking your identity as being the same as like your performance at your job, and not taking your performance on any given task, meaning something about who you are as a data scientist or a scientist, or your overall intelligence or abilities. So, it is my job as a manager to like coach people and constantly try to get them to like, make adjustments. And I'm giving feedback constantly, and I'm getting feedback constantly. And I try to take that as a gift and not be defensive when someone says, hey, this could have been better, or this thing didn't go the way that you thought. So the more you can kind of have an open feedback back and forth with your manager, where it's not taken personally, and it's a place where, things can be talked about transparently, the faster you're going to get better at your job, and the better relationship you're going to have with your manager. And then I guess the last area I would touch on is advocating for yourself. I think that I assumed early on in my career that my manager would just sort of magically find opportunities for me and like give me things that would get me to where I wanted to go. And ideally, a manager will do that. But I have 6 different people on my team, all with different like competing priorities. And then there's the priorities of the company. So there's a certain amount that like I expect the people on my team to take their reins in their own hands and continue to say, hey, these are things that I want to learn. This is an area where I need more exposure. These are people I want to work with. And so and keeping that top of mind for me. So the way that I do that with my team is once a month, we have a one-on-one that's just dedicated to professional growth, nothing about the tactics of what they're doing in their day-to-day projects, but more about where they want to see themselves going, so that I can then try to think about what can I give them in the next month in terms of opportunities or projects to kind of hone some of those skills, and also focus feedback on the areas where they want to grow. But cooking that into your relationship with your manager and just making sure that they're constantly kind of thinking about your trajectory is very important, and something that you can proactively drive, not just wait for your manager to do it. So I think I'm at time. I don't know if we have time for any other questions, but can also, reach me at Berkeley Jess on all social media, and I'm happy to talk more about any of these things.
I think our speaker. Can you share those slides? Can you share it through Zoom?
Share the slides through Zoom? Yeah,
Yeah.
sure, I can do that.
Yeah, so on the slide deck, I had a whole set of additional resources, including books, and then I also shared a blog post. So there's additional resources there, and that was Cassie's question. How do you reverse the course of a relationship that has become very negative? Yeah, that's really hard. I think for me, I try to like proactively talk about the elephant in the room and say like, hey, it seems like we've gotten on course here. It seems like we have a hard dynamic. Can we reset? Can we like start from the beginning and like really say like, hey, I think we both have the intention of having a smooth working relationship. I think we both really want the company to do well. We both want to be successful here. Let's find things that we agree on and a common ground as a base for this relationship and then build from there. But it does take both people to be willing. And, you know, I've definitely had relationships where even though we tried, it just like we never could get beyond some of those negative courses that we were on. And for those people, I just had to find ways to work around, not, you know, try to not collaborate as closely with them or work around that relationship.
All right, let's thank Jess one more time. Great, and keep it going for all of our speakers for today, please. All 10 of them, as well as our sponsors, the AAS Employment on Committee, the American Institute of Physics, Mozilla, sponsoring our evening event tonight at the Rusty Nail. So as we mentioned, we have our website. There's a QR code. There's the tiny URL, tinyurl.com/ATDS 2024. On there is contact info for the organizers, for all of the speakers. We'll get the recordings and probably the decks for all the speakers up there in the next couple of weeks as well. QR code and tiny URL for the email list. It is relatively light traffic. There's only a few emails a year, mostly about this. Also on the website, there's a little recruitment corner with some job postings from a couple of the speakers today. Once again, the ATDS podcast is now available, episode 1 on YouTube and wherever you can get podcasts, and we'll drop a new episode every first Friday of the month, I think is what we decided.